Here's our documentary, Apartheid Israel, filmed here in South Africa in 2014. Shock and outrage expressed by thousands of South Africans across the country. They're venting their anger over Israel's unrelenting bombardment of Gaza. Palestine, they say, is much a victim of apartheid, as South Africa was for decades. They have joined their voices and hope the South African government will act soon by showing leadership in resolving the Israel-Palestine crisis.
We here are all former victims of brutal apartheid system that humiliated us on daily basis, that took our dignity away, that invaded our country and continent and took everything that we used to say it belongs to us away, that did everything that we detested throughout our lives. But something very important you said, Muhammad, and that is what we went through over 300 years of colonial oppression in South Africa is like a Sunday school picnic to what the Palestinian people are going through every day in their own land. An invading army came and took their land through a barrel of the gun, forced hundreds and hundreds of thousands of the citizens of that country, forced them into exile, took every square, every inch of that land and put in new boards, now Israel, no longer Palestine, confined that population into a small piece of land now called the Gaza Strip, whilst occupying the rest of the country through the guns, received most sophisticated and powerful support from that hypocritic state called the United States of America. Down with them. Shame on you, Barack Obama. Shame on you and your name that represent the opposite of what we are doing on daily basis to the brothers and sisters of ours in Palestine. So we are here, Congress, because we understand that an injustice anywhere constitutes a threat to peace everywhere in the world. We are here because our own international icon, Nelson Mandela, told us so many times that we will remain unfree until the people of Palestine have been freed. We are here because we love humankind. We are firstly anti-racist to the core. We don't like racism. We don't like people being discriminated on the basis of their race, gender, religion, or any of the divisions amongst our people. This nonsense that we anti-Jews is something that we must condemn all the time because it's an attempt to shun the struggles, the legitimate struggles of the people of Palestine.
Professor Stephen Friedman, a Jewish academic at the University of Johannesburg, comments further on the position the U.S. has taken on this issue.
I mean, there is absolutely no grounds for the Americans to say that this is about the Israelis' right to self-defense, because in international law, a country which is occupying another country has no right of self-defense against the country it's occupying. In fact, in a South African context, it would be a bit like the government in Pretoria saying that it's got a right to defense against the Western Cape. It's a nonsense. The Israelis claim that they don't occupy Gaza because they haven't been physically there for a while. But once again, in terms of international law, first of all, the Israelis are maintaining a siege on Gaza, and that is illegal. Secondly, international law doesn't say that you actually have to be physically there to be the occupying power. You have to be the power in control. And quite clearly the Israeli state is in control of Gaza. So in international law there is no right of self-defense. If you look at the recent history, you see that the claim that the Israelis are defending themselves against rockets is untrue. The rockets started after the Israeli started attacking Gaza. They were not there before. The Israelis attacked Gaza because they used an excuse. The excuse, of course, was that 3 teenagers on the West Bank, not in Gaza, had been kidnapped and murdered. Now, at the time in which they were kidnapped and murdered, the Israeli state produced no evidence whatsoever that Hamas had any involvement in this. Subsequently, the Israeli police have said publicly that Hamas was not involved in this. So what the Israelis did is they trumped up a charge against Hamas. They used that as an excuse to invade. And when people responded by firing rockets, they then said, we're protecting ourselves against the rockets. And the Americans, for domestic political reasons, have simply bought into that story.
Since the bombardment began, protests like this one have been a frequent occurrence.
The biggest protest which everybody in South Africa is celebrating at the moment since the dawn of democracy was on the 9th of August in Cape Town. We marched to the South African Parliament. We see that over 200,000 people came out from Mpumalanga, Limpopo, Gauteng, Free State, all the provinces in South Africa, and it was really amazing. I mean, we had keynote speakers from Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Deputy Minister in the Presidency, Buti Manamela, and other various. Kwara Kekana, who's the national spokesperson for BDS, was also there. She was the MC. And what was historic about this event was that it was also on Women's Day. And in this protest, the women were actually leading the protest. We had over 1,000 women at the front with banners, BDS banners, other different banners, leading the protest in the name of Palestine, obviously against Israeli attacks on Gaza. And we can see that the momentum from this protest is keeping up. We have other events that are occurring throughout the country still. Not only protests, not only march, people are having screenings, campaigns in terms of hosting people such as Ronnie Castrol's, people from the BDS organization, and they're calling us and they're telling us, we are having these events, please can you send speakers, please can you send flyers, material. We want BDS to be involved. We want to work under the banner of boycott, divestment and sanctions for Palestine against Israel. And
BDS South Africa says they will be unrelenting in their objective to get the government to take decisive action against Israel.
we need history, our own history, to teach us where to from now. We need to take the lessons of the anti-apartheid movement and strategically and constructively use that to free Palestine. And why the ANC and why the heavyweights? I mean, they are the comrades, they are the veterans. They fought the actual anti-apartheid movement in South Africa against the South African apartheid regime. And this is why we're saying, I mean, not only is the ANC leading government, but they have a close history. They know too well. And we see where Nelson Mandela's famous quote, where everybody uses, we know too well that South Africa will only be free when apartheid is free. So we've made a commitment to the South African people. We've made a commitment to the people of Palestine in particular that we will take constructive action, that we will do something.
In fairness to the South African government, and I'm very often not fair to the not sympathetic to the South African government on this particular issue, they are doing more than a lot of other governments we could make. I mean, they're obviously doing more than the Americans, but because of the particular political reality, they're doing better than any of the other Middle Eastern governments who should be doing something. But to say that it's nearly enough is not the case. There is a great deal more that the South African government should do, and which they aren't doing. That said, I don't think that the correct response to that is for people to simply fold their hands and to say, well, South African government, when are you going to have a more active stance on Palestine? In democratic societies, and we are a democratic society, governments respond if there are political voices in the political space telling them to respond. So really those people who feel, in my view correctly, that there ought to be a stronger government reaction need to make their voices heard. People like me, for what it's worth, make my voice heard when, I'm fortunate enough I did have the privilege of speaking to the Parliamentary Committee on International Relations. I've had the privilege at times of being in discussions with senior members of the South African government on this issue, and you obviously put the point to them there. But the reality is they're not going to change their position until they get the sense that thousands and probably millions of South Africans want them to change their position. My view, I can't produce a survey, my view from my interactions, particularly with my black colleagues, is that the vast majority of South Africans support greater pressure on the Israeli state. But those voices need to be organized and those voices need to be heard.
There are, however, characteristics of apartheid Israel that does not quite fit the South African scenario when brutal killings took place back then. For one, Israeli aggression is far more brutal, inhumane, and merciless. So says Professor Friedman.
In the 1920s, there was a Zionist leader called Jabotinsky, who was a right-wing Zionist leader at the time, and he wrote some famous articles, and really what those articles said, he was criticizing the other Zionists. He was saying, look, it's a waste of time pretending that Palestinians will ever accept what we want to do here, because what we want to do is to create a state on their land, and no human beings will ever accept that. So Jabotinsky's solution to that problem was we must create, we being the Zionists, create an iron wall which ensures that whether the Palestinians like the presence there or not, they have to accept it. Now, although that was originally a right-wing Zionist view, in the 1930s, David Ben-Gurion, who became the first prime minister of the Israeli state, who was regarded as a left-wing, a Labour Zionist, made an almost identical speech. And what Ben-Gurion said was, we need to create a situation where the Arabs, as he put it, will despair. And if they despair, they will accept what we impose upon them. And that is the basis of the way in which the state operates. So you have to use massive levels of violence, because you don't really want to negotiate with people, you don't really want to live with them, you want to make sure that they're terrified.
Muslims in South Africa might have an attachment to Palestine and perhaps remain more forthright about the issue. But make no mistake, judging by the large turnout of South Africans protesting across the country, this is viewed as a South African story. Alan Horwitz is a South African Jew who served as an Israeli soldier and grew up as a Zionist. He is now a human rights activist and a strong opponent of Israel.
I mean, when I look through these photographs of myself as a tank driver in the Israeli army, it really is coming from another lifetime. And yet there's continuity, because I understand my background and I've accepted my identity in a positive spirit as being a Jewish person, right? At the same time, what defines me more essentially is the fact that I'm a human being. But the turning point came where, towards the end of my 2-year period, we were, for the first time, assigned to, we were instructed to go to Hebron, which was part of the West Bank, and join in a search for arms, because one of the Palestinian resistance groups had an incident with the Israeli army, and we were sent in. There was a shortage of manpower to search for arms, and we were instructed to go into a village and search that village. And I remember so clearly standing in a central part of the village, The other soldiers had instructed the inhabitants, the villagers, to come into that square and stand in guard over these people. These were civilians. And I stood there while the other soldiers went and searched the houses, and I was standing guard over these defenseless people. And I said, no, these people are not my enemy, and they're not necessarily the enemy of Jews. Their country, their village, their land is being threatened by another force, by another nationalism. And that was a turning point. And together with 3 or 4 other soldiers, and ironically all of us were Jews from outside of Israel, there were some South Americans, 1 or 2 other South Africans, we went to our commander literally that night and said, we're not prepared to do this. We are in the tank force, but we're not prepared to act as soldiers of the occupation. I think the solution is really what we've practiced in South Africa, and that is to have an open society where, irrespective of one's national or language or religious background, we are first and foremost equal citizens of a particular entity, the Republic of South Africa. So that in Israel-Palestine, it is such a small territory compared to South Africa. It's laughable that 2 people can't somehow find a way to guarantee each other, let's say, cultural autonomy, religious rights, but at the same time to maintain what we call a civilized intercourse, because the economic ties between the two are and should be strong. And Israel-Palestine could become a very important cultural, scientific and economic hub in the Middle East, let's say together with Lebanon. I mean, that dream is not necessarily utopian. It is something that could be realized if on both sides there was acceptance that the clock cannot be entirely turned back. But to go forward, there has to be a re-evaluation of what national rights constitute.
Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine!
They must be free. Free Palestine, free.
Yeah. This is not a matter of religion, it's more of humanity. We're not against Jewish people, and Jewish people are here to protest with us. It just says so much. It's saying that, you know what, people are killing innocent children, innocent lives, and just because of political problems, and we can't just stay here and do nothing about it. We need to take a stand, and as a country, as the world, we need to take a stand, and we should free Palestine, free Gaza.
Our point is that the Palestinian struggle is our struggle as the people of South Africa. We know very well to be discriminated in your own land. We know very well the forced removals. We were yesterday the recipients of that international solidarity from the whole world. Therefore, we have to give that solidarity to the Palestinian people.